Coming up on Outsider Information, we talk about institutional knowledge and how it can be the one thing in your organization that inhibits growth. And we're going to play a little bit of Jenga. All right, welcome back to Outsider Information here on Versify. I'm Brandon, and I've got a couple of things I'm going to dive into. So how well I can get through this first part will determine whether I do this in one pieces or two for this episode. So we're going to get right into it. Drink of the episode is a mixed berry limeade. Recipe is always going to be in the description. Okay. Institutional knowledge, what is it? It's the base of knowledge that exists within an organization that is more or less embedded within its structure. It's good, all right? It means that there's a level of stability that exists internally that allows for sustained functionality. So some examples could be organizational culture, right? The impact it has on employee engagement, how it contributes to the overall success and the identity of the institution. Key personnel, the roles and responsibilities within the organization, emphasizing their contributions and the critical role they play when achieving some of those broader organizational goals. Processes, workflows, the efficacy and effectiveness of established processes, workflows, and really how they contribute to the smooth function within an organization. Customer stakeholder relationships, and the significance of maintaining those positive relationships with customers, clients, partners, and other stakeholders, and really how they impact organizational success. And history, project history, successes, challenges, lessons learned, and exploring how the organization uses those knowledges to improve future initiatives. Those are just a couple of examples of what kinds of institutional knowledge can exist, but it does take on many forms, typically from having people in positions for a while, that allows this to build over time. Again, this is a good thing, but at what point we have to ask ourselves is having this level of experience in a specific place begin to create issues within the organizational workforce. So let's look at how we build systems, right? And in any context, when we build a system, nothing is absolute. It should be able to be tweaked and adjusted during its lifespan. A full deconstruction of a system that's been built is never an ideal scenario unless the thing that you've built has become so distorted that even making a simple fix ends up breaking another function of the structure. But more often than not, if you're going through a complete deconstruction, that means something went critically wrong during your process. But I digress. Going into an example real quick, let's take a look at Cuba. Since the 1950s, they were essentially isolated by the Western world. And when you traveled there, it was like going into a time capsule when you looked at the cars. The cars from Cuba were also from that era, 1950s and earlier. And due to being unable to get new parts brought in to their country, the locals figured out how to engineer their vehicles over the last multiple decades with uniquely modified parts in the goal of survival and sustainability. It worked. But now, if you had somebody who has never seen these types of modifications that have been made to a vehicle and they're suddenly asked to perform routine maintenance, there might be some questions of how they can apply their modern expertise into something that has been so deeply modified to fit a specific niche. So that earlier example of building something and distorting it so much that you're only able to modify it the way you modify it, resulting in a complete deconstruction. So institutional knowledge in an organization, where it becomes a problem, parallels that above example, where we live in 2024. A hallmark of my dissertation's research is that turnover is something we need to accept as a reality with newer generations of workers. What does that mean and why is it relevant? I could look at it two ways. It could be an argument actually against change, because if somebody's only going to be in an organization for a short period of time, why would we deviate from anything that we're doing to placate them? The counter to that is maybe people aren't staying because they're being asked to fit into something that's a complete clash to their experience, their expertise, and potentially even their philosophy. The big myth organizations say when trying to attract new employees is how they want innovation and change, all of the buzzwords of hope and opportunity that lure high quality people in. There might be some in that organization that truly do want to be on the cutting edge of the next big thing, but all it takes is one high powered roadblock to kill any momentum regardless of what it is. Where institutional knowledge fails an organization is rooted in the mindset of simply being experienced means you know what is best. The best cultures understand the history of what has existed and don't make changes just to make changes. They make changes out of a desire to evolve practices to remain the best. They take new experience, and apply it to their current structure to elevate themselves into a new stratosphere. The mindset, however, is an anomaly, not the norm. Where turnover plays a role here is when power becomes very centralized. As an organization, just by the sheer numbers of it, you're going to trip yourself into finding a really great employee. You're going to be thrilled that that person is really smart, really passionate, and can bring a fresh new perspective. That is until they meet the roadblock that is somebody who is really just has more influence in the organization. Now, this is not saying that you should just neglect what has been built, because the reason why your organization probably has been successful is because that stability has existed. But the reason why organizations continue to grow is by bringing in fresh minds into leadership positions. I'll get into this example more really in the next section or part of this episode when we talk about how institutional continues to block change from happening. It doesn't matter how stable the organization is in the moment. At some point, that knowledge base will no longer exist. And when it no longer exists, because it's been held on to so tight and centralized, when it no longer exists, the entire structure will collapse without that key part holding it together. A sports example, shocker, right? I'm not going to deviate from that, would be the New England Patriots from the last few years. Was there an erosion of coaching skills by Bill Belichick? Not at all. And if you know football or watch football, you would see that that was not the case. The team still performed really well in some very key areas. But there was such a brain drain of people who existed in that system, from the personnel department, the coaching staff, the players, all the people that existed in that system over the entire dynasty over the last few years found themselves no longer in the organization. And when new people came in, they were not only unable to fit, they couldn't even exist, because the same architect who was in control of the structure was crippled by the inability or desire to make changes. And really what they needed in this case was a complete deconstruction of the system. And now Bill Belichick is looking for a new job, which honestly, looking at it like that, it's probably a good thing for both sides. New England can build a brand new structure and a different image and maybe try to avoid the sins of the past of having so much centralized power. Although you could say if anyone deserved it, he did. But it's a good example of why you don't want one entity to have that much concentrated power over an organization. And it's probably good for Belichick because he can take his knowledge base and apply it to a new place that will hopefully value what he brings to the table. So that's going to be key there. We're making good time. All right, we're only at 8 minutes. So we're going to do a shift here. And I promised you all in the intro a game of Jenga. So we're going to continue with the theme of organizational structure from the lens of a Jenga tower. So in the organizational Jenga tower, you've got 3 areas broken into what you're going to focus on as the base of your organization: executive leadership, management and training, your personnel. Top to bottom and how it's constructed plays a significant role in how an organization can and will function. At the top, you want stable leadership that guides the organization from a distance. Sometimes it can become too top-heavy, which may lead to some instability, but also if they are too involved. When your leadership begins to bleed into the lower tiers of the structure, it can cause some instability, because if those pieces are removed, suddenly now you've lost a core piece right there, which doesn't allow your structure to stay standing. Management and training are the usual culprits of organizational dysfunction. This is also where that institutional knowledge tends to stockpile. The processes and procedures built in this area are what allow the organization to function. The problem, though, is many organizations equate longevity as a reason to give a longer rope rather than continued accountability. And then you got your personnel. No organization can function without personnel to power it. People-powered is essentially every organization. Whether they empower their staff or not, they can't function without your personnel running things on a general day-to-day basis. No people means no business. So that it can't be understated here how important this demographic is, because they are the best opportunity to create that lasting stability. So let's break this whole thing all down. All right, while every organization has an executive structure, they are typically far removed from the day-to-day. And that rarely has an impact on how the operation functions, which again, you want that. You don't want your executive leadership butting their heads into the day-to-day. Their tasks are high level, and honestly, outside of a general inquiry of how everyone works or to engage with people, it's a major red flag if you've got your executive team finding their way into your day-to-day operation. They're entitled to, but a good executive team is going to know not to. Think about the Jenga tower. If you remove a block off the top of a structure, nothing really major happens, right? But if you move that block down into the middle of the structure, right, and that's where it starts, and then you remove it, things start to become a little bit unstable. And that's what you want to try to avoid. So you see the point. Training and management is where those processes lie. There is often an unwillingness to change because of how deeply rooted those current processes are, and there's a fear of change for that institutional knowledge might leave if you push them out of their comfort zone. Either way, they are right in the middle of the structure, which if you remove a block, it results in that total collapse, at least if it happens all at once. Remember, there's a finality to everybody in an organization, and that institutional knowledge that you have, it's going to be gone at some point. And you want to make sure that you give yourself a chance to develop, because otherwise you're going to end up in that same space, whether you do a manual deconstruction or it happens just because you lost a key piece. So now we get to the very bottom, not in terms of importance, but just where this group exists on this tower. While training and management is the structure, think of your personnel as the foundation. When anything has cracks in the foundation and it begins making the structure unstable, you begin to have some issues. General personnel is the reason that turnover exists, because employees are very quick to leave situations that are not favorable to them, and because of that, it never allows a new knowledge base to develop. So let's unpack all of that together. So we're going to start from kind of where we began with the institutional knowledge piece, this Jenga tower. We're putting it all together here, all right? The people responsible for the day-to-day, there's a clash. Generationally and with philosophy, there is a clash. Sorry, twisted my words up. But there's a complacency that tends to set in with management because, as I said earlier, organizations will simply luck into great employees. Let's think about this on a grading scale, all right? How many times do organizations say that they want a bunch of A players on their teams? I'm pretty sure I've used this example before. I've said this. I laugh all the time when I hear people talk about wanting A players. They're expensive. A's are expensive. A's are hard to manage, and A's cancel each other out. So the idea that you want a bunch of A's, it's not realistic for any team building structure, because you can't operate that way on any team having a bunch of high profile personalities and skill sets. It doesn't work. Inversely, C's and D's, you might not think you need or want them, and the idea of hiring somebody who isn't an A might make you cringe, but when you think about how a team is built, think about how any team is built. Not everyone's a star. Those C's and D's, those are your role players. They might not be your most high valued assets, but they are very important because they're able to function in niche areas and in the right conditions when surrounded by the right people. How this gets distorted, though, is those C's and D's are the benefactors of really outlasting everyone around them. Most of the time, people know their own limitations, but they're just good enough at a particular aspect of the job. They acquire a knowledge base, and because the number of people who have existed as long as them is very small, they suddenly end up in a management position. And that's where the problem starts, because if they survive that long in a lesser role, now that they have influence, they can shape the system to what they know, what their experience is. And it's often not the greatest, even though they tend to function well enough in the environment that they're in. So transitioning back to those A's and B's, they see this and think to themselves, wait, you mean I'm taking orders from that? I'm doing all their work. They're awful at their job. Why isn't anyone doing anything about their inability to actually function? The spirit-crushing cycle of knowing your abilities and watching your efforts get thrown out by people who just simply refuse to acknowledge anything except their own facts, it is maddening. And when you're really good at something, it's met with a whole different level of rage, because those really good employees organizations say they covet decide, well, it's not worth it to stay and put in the effort in a place that refuses to not fix the problems, but completely dismiss your efforts and your ability that really good people put into their jobs who want to be successful. Again, people want to work. People want to be successful. People just want to make sure they're doing it in the right environment for the right reasons, in a place that also values them and has their best interest in mind. This is the shift that a lot of organizations are struggling with. So how this looks in Jenga form is the middle stays intact, which keeps the structure from just imploding from the middle, but the foundation, your personnel, is constantly on unstable ground because it becomes impossible to keep people who are willing to buy into the old ideals and way of doing things, because you refuse to change anything. It becomes about priorities. What's the goal of your entity, your organization, company, whatever you're doing? Is it to just get to the end of the day and survive? Well, if that's the case, keep doing what you're doing, because that's a really easy bar and that's a really low bar. And hey, as long as the check clears and you're happy, keep doing that. But if your goal is to remain the best or make your way into being the best, you might need to do a little bit more active personnel management, which I do have as a future podcast topic. But phasing people out to bring people in, it's not a poor practice. If anything, it's what you should do to keep yourself current with your knowledge base in any field or industry that you're working in. It's different than retraining. Retraining is a very outdated implementation of organizational development. Proposing new concepts to change-resistant individuals is a waste of money and resources when the catalyst for change is literally giving your tower the ability to stand on your own. Now, it's not just as simple as getting rid of people. I don't want to understate the difficulty here, but if it's implemented gradually, change, you give yourself the natural ability to phase people in and out of your organizational structure without compromising it. You allow institutional knowledge to exist, but not become so cumbersome and complicated that it creates a strain on anybody that tries to operate within it. Change all at once, it's not even a responsible option, right? You don't want to just throw change at once. You want to keep something similar. But if change is embraced and conducted over different series, different timelines, different irradiations of management, leadership, throughout the whole existence of the structure, it doesn't make changing things seem as difficult, as alienating, or as much of a fight as it could be. So just keep all that in mind. That's it. We've got some job postings up on Versify, so if you're interested in creating with us, please reach out, both as a podcaster or as a writer. Please make sure to check out our LinkedIn page, our Medium page, in addition to what we have here on Spotify. And as always, thank you. We will see you next time.